Welcome back, everyone, to an episode of Endurance Insights with myself, Coach Mark Cullen, where I go on here every week and try and give you solid, science backed, and field backed information on things that really allow you to move forward your endurance training and racing performance. So, I've been at this just over 10 years. I'm deep in the research, talking to the best coaches, the best athletes, reading science articles. So I try and debunk some of the influencer myths and stuff that are out there these days and just try and talk about a number of different topics around, especially in my world of running, triathlon, and CrossFit endurance, where I'm helping a lot of athletes these days. So I'm going to talk about a few things that I've been posting on Instagram recently, and I can kind of expand a little bit more on them while we're on here today. So first one I want to talk about is why don't we cover the full marathon distance in training? This is an age-old question that I get from people because if they do a 5K, a 10K, a half marathon, oftentimes they'll cover at least that distance or longer within some of their longer or midweek training runs. So there's a reason why we can't cover that, and it's just because it's way too taxing. The marathon distance for most, especially recreational runners who are running less than 100K a week, more people who are running marathons are going to be more in that 50 to 80K range, especially if they're a recreational runner. It would just be too risky in terms of the injury risk and the recovery side of things. So for a lot of those people, it's going to take you 7 to 14 days to fully recover from doing that distance, even if it's not at marathon pace and it's an easy thing. So it's just we can run shorter, maybe more like 20 miles, which is 32K, or even a bit less than that, run in that 215 to 245 total time range, and maybe do a run the day before or run after and bulk up that overall weekend or overall volume within the week. And that's going to go a longer way to pushing fitness forward than just one heroic long run like that. So I think a lot of people, they only need to run up to probably 230 to 245, maybe 3 hours max for somebody running more like a 4 or 5 hour marathon. So their body can get, and mind can get a little more used to that. But the best way in terms of like actually improving marathon fitness is to stack a bunch of solid weeks and get yourself ready for the demands of that last 10 to 15K of the marathon. And we do that from first overall frequency and volume in our week. So running 3 days a week, a little bit longer, it's usually going to be better if you can get up to maybe 4 or 5 runs a week and still have three decent longer runs in the week. One that's your like key longer run, and then some more supporting runs in there to boost up that overall weekly volume. It's easier to do over 5 runs than cramming it over 3. We do those key threshold and speed intervals to help kind of push that ceiling up in terms of the VO2 and the LT2. It also helps us improve our LT1, which is our aerobic threshold. And for most people, when they're running a marathon, it's going to be between LT1 and LT2. So the more space we can make up above, the more we can bring aerobic threshold up as well, which is going to allow you to run faster and more efficiently for that marathon. Like I talked about, we build durability over those long runs. And then in the final 6 to 8 weeks, we start to dial in with some more marathon specific workouts. So it might be something like a 32K run where you're doing maybe 3 by 8K marathon pace with 1 to 2K easy between each of those blocks, or a 4 by 5K in there. So you can see later in a week when you have a little bit of fatigue, can you run these paces for 4 by 5K, which is only like a half marathon of that running pace. And if you can't do that, you might have to dial it back for race day, because even when you're tapered, you might not be able to hold it for double that distance. Where if you can comfortably do it with a little bit of a challenge, that 4 by 5K within a 32K run at the end of a long week, like then you're probably in a good spot that with a taper and super shoes and race environment and carb loading, you're probably going to be able to have stand a much better chance of holding that through the last 10 to 12K, where the marathon is where the make or break moments are. So just wanted to touch on that one. Next one I wanted to talk a little bit about is my fueling plan. So I'm doing Eugene Marathon in April. Training update I got a little carried away testing some stuff out and did a long run and a Wednesday workout that were pretty close to each other and pretty intense, and I got a little Achilles niggle. So I just took a week off, did some cross training with a bike, which is why I recommend for people who are just pure runners to have something like a bike, because you can take this like stress off of, running's all I have, so I'm going to bleed fitness or things like that if I don't have my run to go to, where I was like, I can take a week off. My run fitness isn't going to change, but I can just nip this right away and then be on the track where I can get back to my key training. So I just took a week off. I'm back to it this week and feels fine. But I have Eugene Marathon in April, and I was talking a little bit about, I did a post on what my fueling plan is for that. So I'll run through it quickly. I usually like to eat breakfast about 2 hours before. I find if I do 3 hours before, I'm starting to get hungry by race time. So I usually do something like oats with banana, peanut butter, maple syrup. That's a very common like pre-workout meal for me. I eat before all of my workouts. I just don't like to get into the spots where I'm going in a calorie deficit. I want to be in a calorie balance. And that's just way better for improving performance and limiting injury risk, especially bone stress injuries. Alongside that, I'll usually have a pretty strong coffee that has about 100 or 150 milligrams of caffeine. And then I'll have probably at least like a liter of water that has around 750 to 1,000 milligrams of electrolytes in it. And then for the rest of that 2 hours, I'm usually kind of sipping on a carb and electrolyte drink. And then I stop that about 30 minutes pre-race, because I want to be able to go to the washroom and not have to like pee rapidly in the first 10K and have to stop. So I also pop another 100 milligram caffeine pill. So I've taken 200 milligrams of caffeine before the race. During the race, I also do a 40 gram SIS gel. So that I like to use SIS, the 40 gram gels, or the 25 gram pH caffeine gels. So I'll talk about where I throw those in the races, but 20 minutes pre-race, I usually do a 40 gram SIS gel, and then I'm aiming for getting a gel in every 30 minutes during the race. So the nice thing with the SIS gels is I find I don't need to have water instantly with them. So I'll usually sip on it over like 10 minutes, so then I don't disrupt my breathing and I'm not trying to gulp a whole gel. I just sip on it, and then I can smoothly do it over 10 minutes. So if I'm trying to get my first one in by 30 minutes in, I'll start at like 20 minutes into the race, and then I'll finish it by 30 minutes into the race. So 40 gram SIS gel done by 30 minutes, another one by 60 minutes. At 90 minutes in, I'm usually taking a 30 gram caffeine gel that has 100 milligrams of caffeine in there. And the reason I take it there is because caffeine typically takes like 30 to 60 minutes to take full effect for you. And I want that to kick in the last 10K of the race and not be peaking once I've finished the race. So taking it kind of around that midway mark of the race is usually a pretty good spot for a lot of people. And then I'll usually take another 40 gram SIS gel at about 2 hours in, and then I aim to get one more in at about 2.5 hours. And I'm aiming for like 240 to 250 in this race. So oftentimes I won't maybe get in that full final gel there. Like, it's nice to maybe have a little swish around the mouth so my body knows carbs are still available. But oftentimes by then the like effort is ramping up and maybe the gut's feeling a little bit twisty in that part, and you're really pushing the effort. So sometimes I can't get that last gel in, but I've done such a good job in the morning of and in the 30 kilometers leading up to that it's totally fine if I miss that last gel. I'm not going to risk a bonk during this. During these races, I hate running with any sort of water in my hand, so that's why I pre-hydrate well, and then I usually try and grab water at every aid station, just a quick glug in the mouth, just to keep sort of that hydration losses to kind of a low value, so it's not affecting performance, because we know we can lose like 1% to 2% body weight before we start to see performance degradation. So if it is a hotter race, like say if it was 15 degrees Celsius or hotter, I would definitely look to maybe carry like a soft flask with me, the 500 ml soft flask, just to be able to get some water in that first half and then go to the cups from there, but then something I don't have to carry for the whole race. So if it was hotter and I was going to be sweating more, probably would do that. But a lot of these races are 0 to 10 degrees Celsius, so not as big of a factor in there. And then my sodium losses aren't super high, which is why I did pre-race with those electrolytes, and then I don't really take any electrolytes during the races. I don't find I really need it. If I'm getting any like little bits of cramping and stuff like that, usually it's because of like muscular and neuromuscular breakdown and just getting twinges from that, and not an actual deficiency from the hydration or sodium side of things. And then my favorite post race stuff, once the gut settles, is usually a burger and a beer. All right, next topic is this is a common one I get from people is they see themselves in a video or somebody tells them that they're heel striking and they wonder, should I change my running form? Most of the research shows you should not, unless you have anything really drastic, like your arms are swinging in front of you or you're crazy overstriding or doing something really weird, like that you should not be changing your run form. Most run form improvements come from doing things the right way, like building frequency and mileage over time, doing speed work, doing run economy work like short hill strides or flatland strides. And even when you look at like the elite side of the marathon, like half of the elite runners are heel strikers, and they are very efficient at that because that's what they practiced and have built that efficiency over time in that. So as a recreational runner, you definitely don't need to try and change that. So, and then there's also some great studies out there. I talked about it in the Instagram reel, but there's a great study of people who they got to actually change from a heel strike to more of a midfoot toe strike. And those people actually became less efficient and more injury prone when they did that. So it's one of those ones it's probably not worth changing. Just do things the right way and you'll actually trend in the right direction and find your efficiency for your anatomy. All they really found was people didn't become more efficient by changing the stride. They just, again, got a little more injury risk in different areas. Same thing if somebody in a mid or forefoot strike tried to move to a heel strike, they would just change where they sort of get those injuries. Next one I wanted to talk a little bit about was, oh man, I don't know if everybody saw it, but last weekend we got a new half marathon world record. Jacob Kiplimo, who ran a 58:20, so it's like 240 per kilometer, like 420 per mile. Pretty wild stuff. Like go try and run a lap of the track. I think that's like 63, 64 seconds. Pretty crazy stuff. My only caveat is especially with all the Kenyan dopers these days. He's from Uganda. I'm hoping he's clean, but I'm always a little skeptical with these performances when they're running that fast. But he had been trending there for a long time and obviously has been on the top for a long time across 10K and half marathons. So I feel like he's probably been tested a lot of times. So I'm hopeful that he's going to be a clean one that we can get and a world record we can get behind here. Next one I wanted to talk a little bit about was lactic acid. So a lot of people talk about how they get lactic acid in the muscles, and this is a big thing that there is slowing them down or causing them to have muscle pain the next day. So actually in our body, when we are at the pH levels we're at when we're exercising, lactic acid actually dissociates into lactate and hydrogen ions. And what happens during this part is when we're measuring it in the blood, it's actually called blood lactate. So we know, I've talked about this many times, but we have our aerobic threshold known as our LT1 and our anaerobic threshold known as our LT2. And these are just key lactate turn points where it's good to know that like below LT1, which is typically 1 millimole of lactate above our resting levels. So for somebody who maybe has a resting level of 1 millimole, usually their LT1 is going to be something like 2 millimoles versus if they were like 1.5 at resting, they might start doing exercise, aerobic metabolism kicks in, they might drop down to a 1 millimole and then eventually rise up and their LT1 might be more like 2.5 millimoles. But usually during this time, lactate is very steady and not increasing. The LT1 is kind of the upper end of our zone 2 training, which is why that zone 1 and 2 is such a productive spot because we can do loads and loads of work at this time. We know there's great aerobic benefits, great for the muscles, the tendons in terms of building resiliency and endurance there. And then we tick over LT1. We start to accumulate a little bit more rapidly during this time, but again, we can still sort of clear it at the same rate that we're producing it. And we're going to see our marathons and our half marathons in here. So we can do these for 75 minutes up to 3-4 hours. Like even a lot of good ultra runners are running like in the low end of this, just over LT1 for a lot of their races there and can manage that. Versus when we go over LT2 where we start to see like 10K pace, 5K pace, 3K mile as you go higher and higher up, lactate is accumulating faster than we can get rid of it, which means we have a finite amount of time before our body eventually slows us down from fatigue. So just good to know those turn points. And a cool skill. You should be able to eventually feel this when you turn over LT1, and it just takes a little bit more focus. Your breathing becomes a little bit more rapid. You feel like the stride, like you're working a little bit harder on it. You're typically crossing LT1. When you cross LT2, it's when you start to get a little bit more of that like panic mindset of like, oh man, okay, I'm really working now. My breathing's becoming rapid. I'm starting to feel like maybe a little tingle in the muscles in terms of like lactate starting to build in there. And you kind of only have a finite amount of time that you can last in there before you're going to eventually blow up. So I think it's just really good to know those sort of like turn points in there so that you know where those races are going to lie and sort of what you physiologically and RPE wise should be feeling during that time. All right, next one I wanted to talk about. I've seen a lot of the hybrid influencers talk a lot about how all they care about is getting the highest VO2, and there's a bunch of guys I've seen who are like, I have a 70 or 80 VO2. I've built up to a professional level VO2. And it's hilarious because, first of all, they haven't even done this in a lab, so they've probably got it done by like a VO2 master, which isn't, or maybe they've gamed the system on their Garmin through some like high intensity intervals that has shown them they have this like insanely high VO2. But a lot of these people are like 18 to 20 minute 5K runners. So they have the VO2 max of a professional runner, but they're running 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes slower than a professional runner over the 5K. And these guys love to talk about how, oh man, the only workouts you ever need are the Norwegian 4x4 where you go balls to the walls, 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, or 10x400 around the track. And these are just like pure VO2 max workouts. But I think what we know and what I'm trying to hammer home here is like every sort of elite runner that you will talk to has a well-balanced training plan and knows that like VO2 is important, but what's more important is fractional utilization, which is how much of that VO2 max you can actually sustain for longer intervals. So a lot of these elite runners have a high VO2 max, so it might be 70, 80 as their VO2 max, like an elite 5K or marathoner, but they can actually run at 85 to 90% of that VO2 max for something like a marathon or a half marathon. So you imagine how fast they can go over those bits. But many amateur runners who maybe have developed this high VO2 that allows them to crush it over like a mile or shorter or a lap around the track suddenly get exposed when they go up to a 5K, a 10K, a half marathon, and they can only access 60 to 70% of this VO2. So that is why I'm such a proponent and why you see so many elites doing high volume training, even if they're a 1500 meter runner or a 5K runner where their events 4 to 12 or 13 minutes. They're running 120, 160K a week, 100 miles a week because they know to maximize adaptations and this fractional utilization, you need to have a big triangle of fitness, meaning a big base on it, which is that zone 1, zone 2 aerobic work. They do tempo and threshold work, and then they obviously do VO2 max type of work, maybe a little more specific, closer to their race, plus top end sort of anaerobic or run economy work through short hill strides or short flatland strides. And they know if they build this biggest triangle as possible, then they're going to be able to maximize their adaptations across all of these zones over time. So they're going to be able to raise their VO2 ceiling, but also raise the LT1 and LT2 behind that so they can do 100 miles a week. And a lot of these runners can go out at 6 minutes a mile and be running below their LT1 doing that. So you imagine how many more miles they can get in a week when their LT1 is that efficient and they're not destroying the muscles or building up lactate, and they go and run another run at that later in the day. So you see a lot of these runners who are running 10 miles in the morning at 6 minutes a mile, and then they'll go back for another 6 miles or 10K in the afternoon at that same pace. Now they just ran, what did we have there? 16 miles on the day at 6 minutes a mile. Like that starts to add up over time, but they had to efficiently build that by working in a bunch of different zones. And my final one I want to talk about here was a common one I get from a lot of newer athletes. So I've talked about this before, but I think so many athletes come into this sport and the first thing they get is a watch that reads their heart rate, usually inaccurately. So what I got a message today from an athlete is they were doing a decently hard workout where their pace and their RPE got into what we would call like a zone 5, around that 5 or 10K pace late in the workout, which we were expecting. But they sent me their heart rate zones after and said, hey, coach, like it says I just worked in like zone 3 and 4 for this workout. Like, did I not work hard enough? And I just had to laugh at this, because I just like to always say, like, what do we care about when we get in the races? We care how fast did we go? How did we pace it? And how did it feel? So pace, power, RPE. That is why I like to use these as the main metrics across this. And what happens is a lot of times this heart rate data we get is inaccurate, especially from the wrist-based watches when it's cold out, or if you have a bony wrist, or at high heart rates. You just don't get accurate data off that. So first of all, if you're going to use heart rate stuff, get a chest strap, or even better for runners, get like the Coros armband. I'm somebody who hates having any restriction on my chest in terms of breathing, so the Coros armband is amazing for that. The second piece is oftentimes the heart rate zones coming off of this watch are very inaccurate too. So they might be off of like 180 minus your age, something like that, like, or 220 minus your age. And it's like, okay, what if my max heart rate's only 170? Then I'm going to just be showing that I'm running in zone 2 and 3, even though I might be effort and pace wise as in a zone 4 or 5. Or some of my athletes who can hit 200 BPM, if they're 30 years old, then it says their max heart rate on there is 190, but they go to 200. They could say, my run felt like I was pretty smooth. Like I was just running like marathon, half marathon pace in zone 3, but my heart rate data says I ran the entire run in zone 4 and 5 for an hour and a half. And it's like, well, we know that's not sustainable. So the data is probably not correct, but were you running in the right pace zone? Did the RPE go with that? So I've talked about this many times, but I think heart rate is much better for like the third metric down the line. So if you're maybe in rhythm on a tempo run and you're like, okay, I'm feeling smooth on this, and my RPE and pace is sort of correlated here, maybe I'll take a look at my heart rate and see how it's responding to that. And looking at things like, how did your heart rate drift over time in terms of, let's remember this, you need to have an accurate heart rate monitor, first of all, that's paired correctly. But I also like to look at my heart rate over like resting heart rate to see how that's sort of trending over time in terms of fatigue levels, not to say I'm using that as like I wake up, oh, my heart rate's 2 beats higher resting, like I got to take a rest day today. It's like, okay, if I notice it trending over time, maybe I'm getting sick, maybe I'm getting fatigued, but I should also be able to feel that in my workouts as well. So things like that, I think heart rate is a great one to use, but I think people would be way better served using pace, power, and perceived exertion and learning those skills in their workouts, because that's what's going to matter when you get to race day. There's 0 awards for highest or lowest heart rate or who spent the most time in zone 2, 3, or 4. Get over it. So I'm going to keep pushing this narrative because I think heart rate is overrated and people don't know how to use it properly and are just psyching themselves out so badly with this stuff. So we'd love to hear what you think on these topics, or if there's anything you want me to cover. As always, if you can toss a like or subscribe on Spotify or YouTube or wherever you're listening to this, helps me get that word out there. Really appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next week.